So, Bradley, we had some amazing news this week that the former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak is going to jail, was put into jail for 12 years. I don't think either of us, when we wrote Billion Dollar Whale a few years ago or during any of our reporting, thought that he would ever go to jail. I mean, he was untouchable for so many years when he was Prime Minister. And that, people are optimistic now. He may get a royal pardon, he may get out. But what the attention has now turned to the question of where is Jho Low? Jho Low, of course, was the orchestrator of the whole 1MDB scandal. Najib helped him, but Jho Low is now on the run, presumed to be in China. And that's why we've decided at Project Brazen to launch this campaign to find Jho Low. We're not trying to do a citizen's arrest here, but we're trying to use the powers of crowdsourcing and journalism to locate him. And Bradley and I are going to talk a little bit today about what we know about where he is, why he's there, and how it's possible that someone who pulled off such a large fraud can remain free. And how that shows how the world really works. And at the end of this episode, we are going to show you a photo which has come in as part of our crowdsourcing effort, which is the last known photograph of Jho Low. So Bradley, where do we think he is?
Well, I think before we say exactly where we think he is, let's just explain about a little bit more of the buildup to why we think he's there. And we have many reasons why we think he's in one particular country. But maybe it would just be kind of fun as well to talk about a little bit of our chasing of Jho Low, because starting in 2015, he sort of stopped his travels. And up until that moment, he was around the world in a new country every few days and on a kind of amazing trajectory that it took us years to figure out what he was up to during that time. But when the US investigators started to knock on doors, he stopped his travel. But he did stay primarily in Asia, as far as we can tell. And there's a couple of interesting stories that maybe just kind of help illustrate what his life was like, especially before the DOJ really ramped up. There was a kind of more at ease phase. And maybe you could just talk about that time that you tried to chase him in Thailand, for example.
Right. So when Najib was arrested, this is back in 2018, just before Billion Dollar Whale came out. When he was arrested, Jho Low really was in trouble. Because up until that point, when the first stories about Jho Low and Najib came out in 2015, I think Najib had told him, look, get out of Malaysia. You're being spotted here. It's too embarrassing. And he spent a lot of time away from Malaysia, out of Malaysia from that point onwards, mainly in Thailand. He was staying in Bangkok in a couple of hotels there. And he was in Shanghai in the Peninsula Hotel on the Bund. I mean, we know that, Bradley, because of course you visited that hotel and were able to find out that he was staying there. The reason he was in Bangkok was because he's a Chuchao Chinese, and his family came out. His grandfather came out of China, and he has family in Bangkok. Obviously, a lot of ethnic Chinese in Bangkok, and so they own a mall there, a Korean or used to own a Korean themed mall in Bangkok, and so he was able to live there. And I think going forward from 2018 onwards, after Najib got arrested, things got a lot more difficult for him, and we don't have any evidence of him being in Bangkok after that point. But we do, Bradley, have some knowledge of him being in China after that point, right?
Yeah, and just another note about before that, for a long time, he was kind of hiding in plain view, right? Because he was living on his yacht for long stretches of time. We even talked to a crew member who said he would just pace around the gymnasium in the yacht, never using the equipment, but using it as his office, and up all hours talking to different people, trying to come up with a strategy to deal with the US investigation primarily. But when he was on that yacht, the whole world could see, if you go into one of the yacht tracking websites, which are free, you could see where the equanimity was at all times. And you could never be sure he was on the boat anytime, but you could watch it move around. And we watched it like every single move of it. We had a little, subscription to where that yacht was. So I think in a way, he was hiding in plain view. He was away from the ability to be extradited. He felt safe enough, but he wasn't completely hiding, because his yacht was broadcasting this beacon. And we even had an example where you chased the yacht once in Thailand. I went up to the yacht in Hong Kong when it was in the port there, and I literally knocked on the door and talked to the captain. He wasn't available at the time. But all of our reporting over the last years since we really started was pointing to Jho setting himself up in China, and primarily he was in Hong Kong, Macau, and then there was these visits to Shanghai that maybe would go on longer or shorter depending on what was going on. And in some ways as well, people always think of Jho Low as the like great mastermind kind of character that, somebody who can launder money by the billions and stuff. But he did a lot of things throughout the years that were kind of, for a better word, just kind of dumb. So, famously, he created a Seychelles company where it ended up his own name was on it. And this was like a core part of the money laundering scheme. Likewise, when he was in Shanghai, we started calling all the hotels in Shanghai based on a tip that Jho Low was in Shanghai. And we finally called the peninsula where they said, oh, yes, Mr. Low Take Jho, our long-term guest from Malaysia. And we were just sort of startled by that. We later learned that there was a lot of reasons why he'd be staying in that hotel. He was in business with the owner of that particular hotel, and it was all announced. It was like, there's a lot of ties between him and them. Of course, we had a legendary editor at the journal called Paul Beckett, and his first instinct was, well, you got to go. You got to go find Jho. So I got on the next flight to Shanghai, and I actually stayed in the Peninsula Hotel and spoke to the staff, and everybody was talking to me about Jho Low and all the room service he was ordering. That was a very strange experience happened where I went to the front desk, and I said, oh, my friend Jho Low is staying here in this hotel, and I just wanted to like ring his room to say hello. The woman said to me, oh, yes, he's here. He's in the residences next door. So I said, okay, I'll go over to the residence. So it's actually like a separate building, but they're connected. And when I got to the residences, the person, the guard, just didn't even look at his computer. And he just said, I've never heard of anyone by that name. And I was, he would completely stonewalled me. So I went back to the woman at the front desk, and I saw her frantically typing. And then like all this red went up on her screen. And then she said, yes, oh, sorry, there's a mistake. I've never heard of this person either. I've never heard of Jho Low, So clearly phone calls were made, security were sort of summoned to protect this long-term resident
right.
of that hotel.
But we know he was there. We also know, for example, that he used his wife and some family members to try to get a membership of the yacht club in Hong Kong, the one that's there on the north shore of the island.
Yeah, her name was actually posted on the wall. New members, and it had her name.
Yeah.
So
we had a source who was a member. Yeah, we had a source who was a member and was able to tell us about that. So we were able to sort of track him. We also knew that he was living in the apartments in Pacific Place in Hong Kong with his family at that time. We just to be clear of the timelines here, Bradley and I are talking about. We're talking about 2017, 2018, around the time when Najib gets arrested. So 2015, the story breaks in our newspaper and other newspapers. Jho Low is sort of pushed out of Malaysia. Then he's in these places: Bangkok, latterly Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Macau, of course, as we say in Billion Dollar Whale. At the time when Najib was arrested or lost the election, he was spending a lot of time in the Marriott Hotel in Macau, living in a suite there with his family. So he'd move around these kind of places. Now, what we're trying to do now is we're trying to narrow the search down and bring it more up to date. So, Bradley, why don't we talk a little bit about what we know about Jho Low's whereabouts and what we've tried to do to find out since this sort of 2019 timeframe that we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I mean, tips come in all the time to us over the years, and we kind of we're addicted to this story. We never turn down a tip or a call, and we talk things through. Many people have talked about seeing him at parties, events in China. I remember there was a Victoria's Secret party in China that he showed up to, and people were shocked that he would dare show his face. There was, and another thing is, it's kind of like his world got smaller and smaller. His world was the whole world. Then it was kind of Asia, primarily China, Taiwan, and Thailand. And then after Najib got arrested, it became China. And then within China, there was sort of 4 main cities that he was spending time in. I think in a way we lost track of him during the COVID pandemic, because at that point, everybody was underground, and we haven't heard from Jho since then. But
well, the Malaysian police said that he was in Wuhan around that time of the beginning of the COVID pandemic as well. So yeah, that's another. There's been a few times the Malaysian police have commented on this. They've said that he was in Macau. They've said that he was in Wuhan, obviously where the COVID pandemic emanated from. But the reason that we're launching this campaign to find him is because the trail has gone a little bit cold. Now, let's talk a little bit, Bradley, about why Jho Low would be in China or allowed to be in China. Just we should be very clear here. There's three arrest warrants out for him: one in the US, one in Malaysia, and one in Singapore. They're all open, as far as we know, for masterminding this fraud. Why would China give safe haven to this guy?
Well, and also China keeps saying that he's not there, that they have no knowledge of him, no information. But we're talking about one of the greatest surveillance states on earth. You know, like if Jho Low's in China, they would definitely know. And in fact, our intelligence is not only that, but Jho Low has minders from the Chinese intelligence. So what's actually the most fascinating about this? People think, because people maybe outside of Asia think Jho Low looks Chinese. Yes, he's Malaysian, but he looks Chinese. He must have a huge network in China. But our information, which is very good, but I can't get into the exact details why, by the time he showed up in China, when he was sort of first going on the run, so to speak, he didn't have that network. He wasn't connected to the political class, to the intelligence network. He actually built that up himself. You know, he used his network to get those people, but when he was living there, he didn't have that network. And
yeah, of course. I mean, his family are Chu Chinese. His grandfather was a fairly ordinary citizen who emigrated to Thailand and then into Malaysia. So they don't come from some sort of connected family.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but if you can imagine, we have to kind of imagine a little bit, but the facts are that Jho Low became heavily involved in China-Malaysia relations, right? We've seen the documents, we've spoken to many people about that. Presumably what he did is if you think about it, he had this amazing offer. Okay, the prime minister of Malaysia is in this huge problem. He's got a big scandal on his hands. You know, newspapers around the world are writing about it. It's being called one of the biggest frauds ever. He's denying there's any fraud exists and that there is no money missing. He's denying it up until the very end. I mean, only by the time he got facing a judge did he start saying, okay, maybe there is money missing. But until that point, he was denying it. So in order to deny it, he needed to cover the hole. So it's an amazing opportunity for another country. This guy needs amount of money that ultimately in China terms is not that big to plug the hole. In exchange, what would he give? What would Najib give in order to help cover up this fraud? And Jho Low was manipulating this and playing this game. And there was travel between back and forth. Jho Low was attending those meetings when Najib came to China, when his underlings came to China. And essentially what emerged was a series of Belt and Road Initiative deals, which is this huge infrastructure investing plan from China all around the world. So it looks like it's kind of beneficent and trying to help development around the world. But this was the prime example on earth of how it had this completely different motivation and dimension. And money from this whole transaction was funneled back into Malaysia in a variety of ways and was used to cover up the hole. Like, you know, there was a
let's just slow down a second and summarize this. So we're back to the point where we haven't gone quite in chronological order for the way we're discussing this. But so the Jho Low, when he first goes to China, and Najib is still in power. Okay, this is the time when you see him in the Shanghai in the hotel there, in the Peninsula Hotel on the Bund. He's acting. He's sort of on the run because there are news stories out about how he's run this huge fraud, but he's also still acting in China as if he's a de facto minister of the Malaysian state, because his co-conspirator in this whole thing, Najib, is still prime minister of a country, right? So he's able to organize these meetings in Beijing and elsewhere. We know this because we got hold of they were dumb enough on the Malaysian side to take minutes of one of these meetings, which we then got hold of. And the Chinese would never do this, in which Jho Low and some very senior people, including a Chinese vice minister called Sun Lijun, have this meeting in Beijing, and Jho Low saying, look, I need you to do certain things for me. For example, can you help get the 1MDB probes dropped in the US and elsewhere? Can you help bug the Wall Street Journal reporters in Hong Kong, which basically meant my home, where I lived in Happy Valley in Hong Kong at the time. And in return, the Chinese were going to get these huge infrastructure deals, railroads, gas pipelines in Malaysia, and they were going to get them at these sort of usurious rates that they were going to charge, and then everyone was going to be able to filch money from those deals. And they even talk about this in the minutes. They say, look, we'll do this at above market rates, but one of the Chinese participants says, look, it has to look like it's at market rates. So those deals would then help fill the 1MDB hole, but also make a lot of money for Chinese state enterprises that could then be passed off between various individuals. Now, Sun Lijun has been arrested for corruption. He was actually indicted in January of this year. And so perhaps these guys were freelancing to a degree. They didn't necessarily have Xi Jinping's, the president of China's, backing for it all. But the point is, Zhou Low was dealing with some very, very senior, just sub-Politburo members of the Chinese apparatus. Now, Najib loses power, and his position becomes a lot more difficult. That those corrupt Belt and Road deals were actually cancelled. I think some of them are still going on, but they were hugely rewritten because they were so bad, such a bad deal for Malaysia. So since that point, well, that explains, why Zhou Low would be allowed to stay in China, because he knows all of this kind of thing about how the Belt and Road deal works, which would be hugely embarrassing to President Xi Jinping if Zhou Low were to turn up in a court somewhere in the world, like in the US or Malaysia, right?
If the whole world knew just how craven and undermining this whole plan was, so that if all these countries in the developing world knew of the details, really understood it and saw it from the testimony of someone, and how they were trying to essentially undermine the sovereignty of a nation state using money, that is like the worst nightmare of China, for that to become the public image of the Belt and Road Initiative. Because of course, right, the US government is saying that all the time, but people can say, oh, the US government, they're just saying that because they're jealous or they're a rival power. But this is in pure paperwork exactly how this plan worked, and how the Belt and Road Initiative is not what it seems, at least in Malaysia,
And we were reported about this in the Wall Street Journal in 2019, but the reach of such a story is relatively limited. And I feel like that this story was probably one of the most obvious ways that China's used the Belt and Road for political purposes. And yes, exactly, they don't want that getting out. So we've answered, where Zhou Low's been over these last few years. We've answered why China would potentially keep him. So now what we have to do is figure out exactly where he is now. Is he under house arrest? Is he able to move around China freely? What body has control of him? Got an email just the other day from somebody saying, look, the question isn't about what he did or where he is. It's like, who's got him? And that's a reference to the fact that he's in China.
Yeah.
So Bradley, should we talk a little bit about what happened since we launched the Where is Zhou Low campaign?
Yes. I would also just say, one other thing I would say is, we're trying to find Zhou. We're trying to show that he's in China, to confirm whether he's in China. But also the other question is, where's all the money? That's another big portion of this investigation that we're doing, because all of that money that's been recovered is only about $1 billion was as assets that were used. But we're talking about $6-7 billion stolen. That money is not accounted for, the majority of it, right? And so Zhou Low is at large. He's offering. There was a story in the Malaysian press. He was offering money to have a settlement with Malaysia about the whole thing.
$300 million.
Exactly. So
he's got hundreds of millions of dollars left.
At least he's admitting, I have this much money. So how did you come across that money? It's all been proven by money trail that it's not his money, and he managed to get it. And the story of how the money got wherever it is now in China and elsewhere is also an extraordinary story. So since we've put out the call, this is the power of the kind of citizen investigative army. We've gotten lots of tips, lots of documents, lots of photos. Some of them are too sensitive to show publicly because they could reveal the person who took them, where they, details that could undermine their own security. But we are going to be as open as we can so we don't put anyone at risk in this search. And we'll try to talk to some other people along the way and show you some of the documents that we have. We have an enormous amount of material that we've never reported, because in some ways our book, when we finished it, there was so much happened after that. It's the story after the DOJ era, when they dropped those first charges, is almost as extraordinary, if not more extraordinary, than the phase where he was going partying and spending the money. So today we're just going to show the first photo that we can share publicly, that I think is actually very indicative of Zhou Low for a number of reasons. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So this is Zhou Low here, with two individuals who we can't identify. He's at Disneyland, Shanghai. That's December 24th, 2019. And for me, this photo captures a lot of things about Zhou Low. For our intelligence about him in all these years that he's been kind of on the run. almost kind of like a little bit disappointing. You're chasing this guy. He's thought to be a mastermind, money launderer, fraudster, or whatever. He's denying all the charges, of course, but you think he might be like in a James Bond lair somewhere. But in fact, he's just wandering around shopping malls. He's sitting in Shanghai Disneyland. And he's always got his phones, many phones, and playing them like a piano, and he's got an entourage, which is another thing that we'll get into in the next episode, who's with Joe. And that might be another way into the story. There's a lot of kind of legendary characters in the case, and a lot of them are still with him or still meeting with him, and still in business with him to some extent. And he's got a family now. We don't want to reveal too much information, but he is married with 2 children, and kind of living a strange domestic life in China while he's at the same time trying to negotiate these, international settlements. So we'll share this as well. Yeah.
As well as talking about the people who are living with him on the run, which includes his father and some other family members and some close friends. We're also going to talk about the people who facilitate him. How is he able to move money around? Who are the cutouts that he uses to access the international banking system? Of course, he can't open an account and use US dollars or euro or any other normal currency. Is he using crypto, for example? And what role is he playing in China's geopolitical strategies as well? Has he got any role there, or is he really just an embarrassment now, somebody who's under lock and key? So we'll get into all of that in these future video essays. But for now, that's the launch of our hashtag #WhereIsJholow campaign.
Absolutely. Great. Well, anyways, everyone, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll try to do this every week if we can. You can also send us tips at projectbrazen@protonmail.com. We're very careful about that inbox and how we treat it. And we will consider everybody who writes into us to be completely anonymous, unless for some reason we all agree that it should be anything else. We really believe in keeping the anonymity of our sources and protecting them as best we can. So we hope to come back with some big updates next week as well.